She thought taking a cook job at Cedar Creek Ranch would simply keep her alive through the brutal Montana winter of 1885. But Catherine O'Brien never imagined the quiet cowboy who helped her settle in was actually the man who owned everything she was working so desperately to preserve. When secrets unravel and a business rival threatens to destroy the only home she's ever truly known, will Catherine choose the security of escape or risk everything for a love built on lies? The stagecoach wheels hit a rock so hard that Catherine O'Brien's teeth rattled. She gripped her worn leather bag tighter as the December wind of 1885 whistled through the cracks in the wooden walls. Montana territory stretched out like a frozen ocean, white and endless under the gray sky. Her stomach growled loud enough for the other passenger to hear. The man in the fancy suit looked at her with pity before turning back to his newspaper. Catherine's cheeks burned red. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and her last coins were spent on this bumpy ride to nowhere. The newspaper ad crinkled in her sweaty palm. Cook needed. Cedar Creek Ranch. Fair wages. Inquired J. Thorne. Fair wages meant survival. Survival meant she wouldn't freeze to death in some alley like the folks back in Chicago after the big fire took everything. Cedar Creek Ranch coming up, the driver yelled from outside. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. What if they didn't want her? What if she wasn't good enough? The fancy suit man gathered his things, clearly heading somewhere important. She only had one carpetbag and a prayer. The coach stopped with a jerk. Through the small window, she saw a wooden building with smoke coming from the chimney. Men in heavy coats moved around like ants, loading wagons and fixing fences. This was it. Her new life or her final mistake. She stepped down onto the frozen ground, her thin boots crunching on the snow. The cold bit through her coat like hungry wolves. The driver tossed her bag down without care, and she caught it before it hit the mud. "Good luck, miss," he said, already climbing back up. "You'll need it out here." As the stagecoach rolled away, Catherine felt truly alone. She picked up her bag and walked toward the biggest building, hoping someone inside could tell her where to find J. Thorne. The door was heavy oak, and she had to push hard to open it. Inside, warmth hit her face like a gentle slap. A stone fireplace crackled with orange flames, and the smell of coffee made her mouth water. Behind a large desk sat a man with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. "You must be the cook," he said without looking up from his papers. "Yes, sir. Catherine O'Brien. I came about the job." He studied her like she was a horse he might buy. "You're smaller than I expected. Can you handle 30 hungry cowboys?" "I can handle anything you put in front of me, sir." The man smiled for the first time. "We'll see about that. I'm J. Thorne. This is my ranch." He pointed to a younger man standing by the window. "Marcus will show you around." Catherine turned to see green eyes and a kind face under a worn cowboy hat. Marcus looked about her age, maybe a few years older. He had strong hands and a gentle way of moving that made her feel safe. "Welcome to Cedar Creek, Miss O'Brien," Marcus said. His voice was warm like the coffee she smelled. "Let me help you get settled." He picked up her bag like it weighed nothing and led her outside. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked past the corrals full of horses. The animals snorted and stamped, their breath making white clouds in the cold air. "The cookhouse is just over here," Marcus said, pointing to a long building with windows glowing yellow in the afternoon light. "You'll have your own room attached to the kitchen." Catherine followed him up wooden steps to a heavy door. Inside, the cookhouse was bigger than her whole apartment back in Chicago. A huge black stove dominated one wall, with pots and pans hanging from hooks like sleeping bats. Long tables stretched across the room, and she could imagine 30 men sitting here for meals. "The pantry's through there," Marcus said, opening a door to show shelves lined with cans, sacks of flour, and hanging sides of beef. "Mr. Thorne believes in feeding his men well. Happy cowboys work harder than hungry ones." Her room was small but clean. A narrow bed sat under a window that looked out at the horse corrals. A simple dresser and washstand completed the furniture. It wasn't much, but it was hers. "Dinner's at 6, Marcus said from the doorway. "The men will be hungry after working in this cold all day. Think you can manage something hot?" Catherine nodded, already planning the meal in her head. She had learned to cook from her mother, who could make magic with the simplest ingredients. "I'll have something ready." After Marcus left, she unpacked her few belongings. At the bottom of her bag, wrapped in her spare dress, was her mother's wooden spoon. She held it tight, remembering her mother's words, "A woman who can feed people well will never want for a home." Now she had to prove those words true. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, starting a fire in the big stove and checking what ingredients she had to work with. The warmth felt good on her cold hands, and for the first time in months, she felt hopeful. Outside, she could hear the cowboys talking and laughing as they finished their work for the day. Soon they would come in cold and tired, expecting a good meal. Catherine smiled as she began peeling potatoes. She might not have much, but she knew how to make people happy with food. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky pink and orange. Through her window, she watched Marcus help fix a broken fence post. He worked with quiet skill, and she found herself wondering about his story. What brought him to this remote ranch? Did he have family somewhere, or was he as alone as she was? These questions would have to wait. Right now, she had hungry men to feed and a new life to begin. The next morning came too early and too cold. Catherine woke to the sound of boots stomping outside her door and men's voices calling to each other. Her breath made white puffs in the air as she hurried to light the stove and start breakfast. "Hope the new cook ain't gonna poison us," said a gruff voice from outside. "Can't be worse than Jake's cooking." Another man laughed. "Remember when he burned the beans so bad we had to throw out the whole pot?" Catherine smiled as she cracked eggs into a big iron pan. She would show them what real cooking looked like. By the time the cowboys filed in, the cookhouse smelled like heaven. Fluffy biscuits, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs with cheese filled the serving dishes. The men sat down without much talk, clearly tired from the early morning work. But when they tasted the food, the room went quiet in a different way. Forks stopped moving. Eyes widened. Then came the sounds she had hoped for, happy groans and the scraping of plates. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years," said an older cowboy with gray whiskers. "Ma'am, if you can cook like this every day, you'll never lack for friends here," added a younger man with kind eyes. Catherine felt her heart lift. These men appreciated good food, and she could give them that. Maybe this job would work out after all. After breakfast, the cowboys headed out to work with full bellies and big smiles. Catherine cleaned up the dishes and started planning lunch. She was wiping down the tables when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "That was some meal," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "The men are already talking about it. I'm glad they liked it. Food should make people happy." Marcus sat down at one of the tables and pulled out a small notebook. "I help Mr. Thorne keep track of supplies. What do you need from town?" Catherine thought for a moment. "More flour, some spices, and maybe some apples if they have any. The men would like pie. I'll add those to the list." Marcus wrote carefully, his handwriting neat and precise. "You know, most of the cowboys here haven't had a woman's cooking in years. Some of them looked ready to cry during breakfast. Where did they eat before I came?" Jake took turns with a few others. "They did their best, but—" Marcus grinned. "Let's just say your biscuits are a big improvement." Catherine found herself smiling back. There was something about Marcus that made her feel comfortable, like she could tell him anything. But she also sensed he was keeping something from her. He carried himself differently than the other cowboys, with a quiet confidence that seemed almost practiced. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. "About 5 years. Started when I was just a kid, really. Mr. Thorne took me in when I had nowhere else to go." "What about your family?" Marcus's face changed, becoming guarded. "That's a long story for another time. I should get back to work. The horses need tending." He left quickly, and Catherine wondered what she had said wrong. Everyone had secrets, she supposed. She certainly had her own. The morning passed quickly as she prepared lunch. Through the window, she watched the cowboys working with the cattle. They moved with easy skill, their horses responding to the slightest touch of the reins. This was a different world from the noisy, dirty streets of Chicago. Marcus appeared often in her line of sight, and she noticed how the other men looked to him for guidance. When a young horse got spooked and ran toward the fence, Marcus was the one who caught it with a gentle touch and soothing words. When two cowboys disagreed about moving the cattle, they asked Marcus to settle it. "He's not just another cowboy," Catherine muttered to herself as she stirred the soup. At lunch, the men filed in with even more enthusiasm than at breakfast. Catherine had made vegetable soup with thick slices of fresh bread, and the cowboys ate like they hadn't seen food in days. "Miss Catherine," said the gray-whiskered cowboy, "my name's Pete. I've been working ranches for 30 years, and I ain't never tasted soup this good." "Thank you, Pete. I'm glad you like it." A younger cowboy with bright red hair raised his hand like he was in school. "I'm Billy. My mama used to make soup, but she never made it taste like this." "What's your secret?" Catherine laughed. "No secret. Just good ingredients and a little love." The men exchanged glances and grins. One of them, a tall man with a mustache, leaned forward. "Miss Catherine, you mind if I ask where you came from? You talk different than folks around here." "I'm from Chicago. I worked in a hotel kitchen before." She paused, not wanting to explain about the fire and losing everything. "Before I decided to try something new." "Chicago." Billy's eyes went wide. "That's a big city. Must be quite a change, coming out here to the middle of nowhere." "It is different," Catherine admitted, "but I like it. The air is cleaner, and the people are honest." Marcus, who had been eating quietly, looked up at her words. Their eyes met across the table, and she felt a flutter in her chest. There was something in his gaze that made her think he understood what she meant about honest people. After lunch, the men went back to work, and Catherine began preparing for dinner. She was kneading bread dough when Marcus returned, carrying a bucket of milk from the cows. "Thought you might need this for cooking," he said, setting the bucket on the counter. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Marcus lingered, watching her work the dough. "You have good hands for this." I knew someone once who could make bread like that. Just watching the dough, knowing exactly when it was ready." "Your mother?" Catherine asked gently. Marcus looked away. "Something like that. I should let you work. Dinner won't make itself." But he didn't leave. Instead, he sat at the table and watched her work. Catherine found his presence comforting, even if he was being mysterious about his past. "Marcus," she said, shaping the dough into loaves, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "The other men, they look to you for decisions. They ask your opinion about things. That's not normal for a regular cowboy, is it?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "I've been here longer than most. Mr. Thorne trusts me with extra responsibilities." It was a reasonable answer, but Catherine sensed there was more to it. Marcus had keys to buildings the other cowboys didn't. He kept track of supplies. He settled disputes. And there was something about the way he carried himself that reminded her of the hotel managers she used to work for, people who were used to being in charge. "What kind of responsibilities?" she pressed. Marcus stood up, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I really should get back to work. The horses need to be fed before dark." He left again, and Catherine stared at the door where he had disappeared. Marcus was hiding something important. She was sure of it. But what? And why did it matter so much to her? She finished shaping the bread and put it in the oven to rise. Outside, the sun was getting lower, and soon the men would return for dinner. She had work to do and a new life to build. Whatever secrets Marcus was keeping would have to wait. But as she prepared the evening meal, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that understanding Marcus Brennan was the key to understanding her place at Cedar Creek Ranch. A scream cut through the morning air like a knife through butter. Catherine dropped her coffee cup and ran outside to see what was wrong. In the corral, a wild Mustang was bucking and kicking while Billy tried to stay on its back. The horse twisted and jumped, its eyes rolling white with fear and anger. "Get off him, Billy!" Pete shouted from the fence. "That horse ain't ready." But Billy couldn't get off. His boot was stuck in the stirrup, and every time the horse bucked, Billy's head snapped back like a rag doll. The other cowboys climbed the fence, trying to help, but they couldn't get close enough without getting kicked. Marcus appeared from nowhere, moving faster than Catherine had ever seen a person move. He vaulted over the fence in one smooth motion and grabbed the horse's bridle. The Mustang reared up on its back legs, towering over Marcus like a mountain of muscle and fury. "Easy, boy," Marcus said in a voice so calm it seemed like magic. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The horse's ears twitched forward. His breathing slowed. Somehow, impossibly, the wild animal began to settle down. Marcus kept talking in that quiet voice, his hands gentle on the horse's neck. Within minutes, the Mustang stood still as a statue. Pete and Jake rushed in to help Billy down. The young cowboy was shaking and pale but alive. "Thanks, Marcus," Billy gasped. "That horse nearly killed me." "That's what happens when you try to ride a horse that isn't ready," Marcus said firmly. "You could have broken your neck." Catherine watched this whole scene with her mouth hanging open. She had never seen anyone handle a wild horse like that. It was like Marcus spoke the animal's language. But what surprised her more was how the other cowboys reacted. They didn't just look grateful. They looked impressed, like they were watching their boss handle a difficult situation. "How did you do that?" she asked Marcus later as they walked back to the cookhouse. Marcus shrugged. "Horses are like people. They just want to be understood. But you made it look easy, like you've done it 1,000 times." "Maybe I have." Marcus's green eyes twinkled with something that might have been amusement. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Catherine. I'm starting to figure that out." That afternoon, Catherine was in the pantry counting supplies when she heard voices outside the window. She wasn't trying to listen, but the men were talking loud enough that she couldn't help but hear. "Marcus sure handled that Mustang," Jake was saying. "Reminded me of his father." "Shoo," Pete hissed. "You know we ain't supposed to talk about that." "Why not? It's been 5 years. The boy's proven himself. Mr. Thorne has his reasons for keeping things quiet. It ain't our business to gossip." Catherine pressed closer to the window, her heart pounding. What weren't they supposed to talk about? What did Jake mean about Marcus's father? "Still seems strange to me," Jake continued. "Living like a regular cowboy when he could be living in the big house." "Jake, shut your mouth before someone hears you." Their voices moved away, leaving Catherine with more questions than ever. Living in the big house? What big house? Mr. Thorne lived in the main ranch house by himself. Why would Marcus be able to live there? She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept spinning. Every little thing about Marcus suddenly seemed important. The way he carried himself, the respect the other cowboys showed him, the keys he had to buildings she couldn't access, the careful way he talked about his past. That evening, she decided to find out more. After dinner, when the cowboys were relaxing in the bunkhouse, she knocked on the door of the main ranch house. Mr. Thorne answered, looking surprised to see her. "Miss Catherine? Is everything all right? Do you need something for the kitchen?" "No, sir. I was wondering if I could ask you about Marcus." Mr. Thorne's expression changed, becoming guarded. "What about him? He seems different from the other cowboys. The men look up to him in a special way. I was curious about his background. Marcus is a good worker. That's all you need to know." "But sir, I heard one of the men mention his father Dash." "You heard wrong." Mr. Thorne's voice was sharp now. "Marcus is just another cowboy, Miss Catherine. I suggest you focus on your cooking and leave the gossip alone." He closed the door in her face, leaving Catherine standing on the porch feeling foolish and confused. Why was everyone so secretive about Marcus? What were they all hiding? She walked back to her room, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus calming that wild horse with his gentle voice and confident touch. She thought about the way Mr. Thorne's face had changed when she mentioned Marcus's father. She remembered Jake's words about living in the big house. Near midnight, she gave up trying to sleep and went to the kitchen to make herself some warm milk. Through the window, she could see a light burning in the main house. Someone was awake, moving around in what looked like an office or study. Without really planning to, Catherine put on her coat and boots and stepped outside. The night was clear and cold, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She walked quietly toward the main house, drawn by curiosity she couldn't control. The light was coming from a window on the side of the house. Catherine crept closer, feeling guilty but unable to stop herself. Through the glass, she could see Mr. Thorne sitting at his desk with papers spread out in front of him. But he wasn't alone. Marcus sat across from him, and they were talking seriously about something. Catherine couldn't hear the words, but she could see their faces. Mr. Thorne looked tired and worried. Marcus looked determined, like he was trying to convince the older man of something important. Then Mr. Thorne reached across the desk and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. It was a gesture of affection, almost fatherly. Marcus nodded and said something that made Mr. Thorne smile sadly. Catherine's heart began to race. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in her mind, but she didn't want to believe what she was thinking. It was too impossible, too strange. She backed away from the window and hurried to her room. But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought kept echoing in her head. What if Marcus wasn't just another cowboy? What if he was something much more important than that? The next morning, she watched Marcus more carefully than ever. She noticed how he checked the other cowboys' work without seeming to. She saw how he made decisions about the horses and cattle without asking Mr. Thorne first. She observed the way he moved through the ranch like he owned it. Because maybe, just maybe, he did. The letter arrived with the morning supply wagon, and it changed everything. Catherine was hanging laundry when she saw the delivery man hand a fancy envelope to Mr. Thorne. The older man's face went pale as he read it, and he immediately called for Marcus. "We need to talk," Mr. Thorne said grimly. "Private." They disappeared into the main house, leaving Catherine with a sick feeling in her stomach. Fancy letters usually meant trouble, and from the look on Mr. Thorne's face, this was big trouble. An hour later, Marcus emerged from the house looking like he'd been punched. His usual calm expression was gone, replaced by something Catherine had never seen before, fear mixed with anger. He walked straight to the barn without speaking to anyone. "What's wrong with Marcus?" Billy asked as the cowboys gathered for lunch. "He looked ready to fight someone." "Probably nothing," Pete said quickly. "You know how these things go." But Catherine could see the worry in Pete's eyes. Whatever was in that letter, it wasn't nothing. She spent the afternoon trying to concentrate on cooking, but her mind kept wandering to Marcus. She hadn't seen him since he'd stormed into the barn. When dinner time came and went without him appearing, she made up her mind to find him. The barn was dim and quiet except for the gentle sounds of horses eating their hay. Catherine found Marcus in the last stall, brushing a black mare with mechanical strokes. His shoulders were tense, and he didn't look up when she approached. "You missed dinner," she said softly. "Wasn't hungry." "Marcus, what's wrong? Everyone's worried about you." He finally looked at her, and she saw something in his green eyes that made her heart ache. "You want to know what's wrong, Catherine? My whole life is about to fall apart, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." "What do you mean?" Marcus set down the brush and leaned against the stall door. "That letter today, it was from a lawyer in Denver. Seems my father's brother has decided he wants to claim his share of the ranch." Catherine felt confused. "Your father's brother? But what does that have to do with you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because my father is J. Thorne, Catherine. This is my family's ranch, and I'm supposed to inherit it someday. But now my uncle is saying he has a legal right to half of everything." The words hit Catherine like a slap. She stared at Marcus, trying to process what he'd just told her. "Your father is... Mr. Thorne is your father." "Yes. But why didn't you tell me? Why does everyone act like it's a secret?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair. "Because 5 years ago, when I turned 18, my father decided I needed to learn the ranch business from the ground up. He wanted me to work alongside the men to understand what their lives were like before I took over. So we agreed to keep my identity quiet." "You've been pretending to be a regular cowboy for 5 years?" "It wasn't pretending. I did the work, learned the skills, earned the men's respect on my own. But now, he gestured helplessly. Now my Uncle Robert is threatening to take it all away. Catherine sank down onto a bale of hay. Everything made sense now, the respect the cowboys showed Marcus, the keys he carried, the way he moved through the ranch with quiet authority. What does your uncle want? Money, land, power. He's been living in San Francisco, spending his inheritance on gambling and bad investments. Now he's broke, and he remembers that his brother owns a successful ranch. But can he really take it? I mean, legally? Marcus's laugh was bitter. That's what we're trying to figure out. The lawyer says Robert might have a case, especially since our grandfather's will was unclear about some things. Catherine felt a strange mix of emotions. She was angry at Marcus for lying to her all this time, but she was also sad for him. She could see how much this ranch meant to him, how it was part of his very soul. So what happens now? Robert is coming here next week with his lawyers. If he can prove his claim, he could force us to sell the ranch and split the money. Or he might try to become a partner, which would be even worse. Why would that be worse? Because Robert Thorne is a selfish, cruel man who doesn't care about the land or the people who work it. He'd probably sell off pieces of the ranch to developers, fire half the cowboys, and run the place into the ground within a year. Catherine thought about Pete and Billy and Jake, about all the good men who depended on this ranch for their livelihood. There has to be something you can do. My father's been fighting this for months through lawyers, but Robert keeps pushing. Now he's bringing in bigger legal guns from San Francisco. Men who know how to twist laws to get what they want. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the horses move restlessly in their stalls. Finally, Catherine spoke. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. All right. What am I to you? Really? Am I just the cook who happened to show up at the right time, or? She struggled to find the words. Do you see me as something more? Marcus looked at her with such intensity that she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Catherine, you're the best thing that's happened to me in years. You're smart and kind and strong, and you make this place feel like a real home instead of just a business. But I'm still just the cook. I'm not part of your world, not really. My world. Marcus stepped closer to her. My world is whatever I make it, and I want you to be part of it if you'll have me. Catherine's heart began to race. Even though I'm nobody special? Even though I don't come from a fancy family or have money or education? You're the most special person I know. You take care of everyone here like they're your family. You work harder than anyone, and you never complain. And when you smile, Marcus reached out and touched her face gently. When you smile, it's like the sun coming up. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. I care about you too, Marcus. More than I probably should. Why shouldn't you? Because look at us. You're the son of a ranch owner, even if you've been hiding it. I'm just a woman who ran away from Chicago with nothing but the clothes on her back. People like us don't end up together. Says who? Says everyone. Says the way the world works. Marcus took her hands in his. Catherine, I don't care what the world says. I care what you say. What we say. Before she could respond, the barn door opened and Pete's voice called out, Marcus? You in here? Your father wants to see you. Marcus squeezed Catherine's hands. We'll talk more later. But Catherine, don't give up on us before we've even started. He left her sitting in the barn, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned. Marcus was Jay Thorne's son. The ranch was his inheritance. And somehow, impossibly, he claimed to care about her. But caring and commitment were two different things. What would happen when his uncle arrived with lawyers and legal papers? What would happen if Marcus had to fight for his inheritance? Would there be room in that fight for a runaway cook from Chicago? Catherine walked back to her room under a sky full of stars, carrying more questions than answers. But one thing she knew for certain, her quiet life at Cedar Creek Ranch was about to become a lot more complicated. The blizzard hit Cedar Creek Ranch like an angry giant throwing ice and snow at everything in sight. Catherine woke to windows rattling so hard she thought they might break, and wind howling like wolves trying to get inside. When she looked out her window, She couldn't see past the cookhouse porch. Everything was white and swirling. She dressed quickly and ran to the kitchen to start the stove. The cowboys would need hot food and coffee to keep warm in this storm. But when breakfast time came, only half the men showed up to eat. "Where is everyone?" Catherine asked Pete as he stomped snow off his boots. "Marcus took 6 men out before dawn to check on the cattle in the north pasture," Pete said, his face grim. "That was 4 hours ago. We ain't heard from them since." Catherine's stomach dropped. 4 hours in a blizzard was dangerous, maybe deadly. Shouldn't someone go look for them? "Can't see 10 feet in this storm. We'd just get lost ourselves." Jake burst through the door, shaking snow from his coat like a wet dog. "Pete, I just talked to Mr. Thorne. He's organizing search parties. Says we can't wait any longer. In this weather? That's suicide." "Maybe, but Marcus and those boys could be freezing to death right now. We can't just sit here drinking coffee while they die." Catherine felt her heart start racing. Marcus was out there somewhere in the storm, possibly hurt or lost. She couldn't bear the thought of him suffering while she stayed safe and warm. "I'm going with you," she announced. Both men stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Catherine, no," Pete said firmly. "This ain't work for a woman. I know these mountains. I grew up in Colorado territory before I came here. I've been in storms like this before. That's different. This is Montana. And this storm is worse than anything Colorado ever threw at you." But Catherine was already putting on her heaviest coat and boots. "Marcus helped me when I needed it. Now I'm going to help him." Jake grabbed her arm. "Catherine, you could die out there. Then I'll die trying to save the man I love." The words came out before she could stop them. Both cowboys stared at her in shock, and Catherine felt her cheeks burn red. But it was true. She did love Marcus, even if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "Well, I'll be," Pete muttered. "The cook's in love with the boss's son." "You knew?" Catherine asked. "We all knew. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Right now, I'm going to help find him." 20 minutes later, Catherine found herself trudging through snow that came up to her knees, following Jake and 2 other cowboys into the white wilderness. The wind cut through her coat like knives, and she could barely see Jake's back even though he was only a few feet ahead. They had ropes tied around their waists, connecting them so no one would get lost. Mr. Thorne had given them each a section to search, and they were supposed to meet back at the ranch in 2 hours whether they found the missing men or not. Catherine's section was a valley where the cattle sometimes sheltered during storms. She pushed through the snow, calling Marcus's name until her voice was hoarse. Her hands and feet were so cold they felt like blocks of ice, but she kept going. Then she heard something over the wind, a horse whinnying in distress. Catherine followed the sound, stumbling over hidden rocks and fighting through drifts that sometimes came up to her waist. She found them in a shallow cave formed by fallen rocks. Marcus was sitting with his back against the stone wall, his face pale and his lips blue with cold. 3 other cowboys huddled nearby, and their horses stood at the cave entrance, blocking some of the wind. "Marcus," Catherine called out. His eyes opened and he smiled weakly. "Catherine? What are you doing here?" "Looking for you, you fool." She rushed to his side and felt his forehead. He was burning with fever despite the cold. "How long have you been here?" "Since the storm got bad. My horse threw me when lightning spooked him. Think I hurt my leg pretty good." Catherine looked down and saw that Marcus's right leg was bent at an odd angle. It was definitely broken. "Why didn't you send someone back for help?" "Couldn't risk it. Storm was too bad. Figured we'd wait it out." Billy, one of the cowboys with them, spoke up. "Miss Catherine, how did you find us? We've been shouting for help for hours." "I heard your horse. Is everyone else all right?" "Cold and scared, but alive," said another cowboy named Tom. Catherine pulled out the thermos of hot coffee she'd brought and passed it around. The men drank gratefully, their faces regaining some color. But Marcus was getting worse, his fever was rising, and he was starting to shiver uncontrollably. "We need to get him back to the ranch," Catherine said. "That leg needs a doctor, and he's getting sick." "How?" Billy asked. "We can't carry him through this storm." Catherine looked around the cave, thinking hard. They had 4 horses, 3 healthy men, and 1 injured man who couldn't walk. The storm was still raging outside, and it would be dark soon. Billy, can you ride back to the ranch and bring help? Take Tom's horse. It's the strongest. Tell Mr. Thorne where we are. I can try, but I might get lost. Follow the rope. Jake and I left a trail rope that leads back to the main search area. From there, follow the fence line to the ranch. Billy nodded and headed for his horse. Within minutes, he was swallowed up by the swirling snow. Catherine turned her attention back to Marcus, who was now unconscious. His breathing was shallow, and his skin felt hot and cold at the same time. She knew enough about injuries to recognize the signs of shock and infection. Tom, help me make him more comfortable. We need to keep him warm until help arrives. They used saddle blankets to make a bed for Marcus and covered him with their coats. Catherine sat beside him, holding his hand and talking to him even though he couldn't hear her. You're going to be fine, she whispered. We're going to get you home, and you're going to get better. And then you're going to explain to me why you thought it was a good idea to go out in a blizzard. Hours passed. The storm began to weaken, but Marcus got worse. His fever climbed higher, and he started talking in his sleep, mumbling about cattle and lawyers and losing the ranch. He's really worried about that uncle of his, Tom observed. What do you know about it? Catherine asked. Just that the man's been causing trouble. Mr. Thorne's been getting letters from lawyers for months. Some of the boys think we might all lose our jobs if this Robert fellow gets his way. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. If Marcus lost the ranch, what would happen to all of them? What would happen to her? But those were worries for another day. Right now, all that mattered was getting Marcus home alive. As darkness fell, they heard voices calling through the wind. A search party had finally found them, led by Mr. Thorne himself. The older man took one look at his son and his face went white. How bad is he? Mr. Thorne asked Catherine. The leg is broken and he has a high fever. He needs a doctor right away. The doctor's already at the ranch waiting. Let's get him home. They loaded Marcus onto a makeshift stretcher and began the slow journey back through the snow. Catherine walked beside him the whole way, holding his hand and praying to whatever gods might be listening to keep him alive. When they finally reached the ranch, Marcus was carried into the main house where the doctor was waiting. Catherine started to follow, but Mr. Thorne stopped her. Miss Catherine, I can't thank you enough for what you did today. Finding him, staying with him, you may have saved his life. I love him, Catherine said simply. I couldn't do anything else. Mr. Thorne studied her face in the lamplight. I believe you do. The question is, what are you prepared to do about it? Before Catherine could answer, the doctor appeared in the doorway. He's going to be fine, he announced. The leg will heal, and the fever is already breaking. He's asking for someone named Catherine. Catherine's heart soared. Marcus was alive and he was asking for her. Nothing else mattered. The sound of wheels on gravel woke Catherine from the deepest sleep she'd had in days. Through her window, she could see a fancy black carriage pulling up to the main house, drawn by 4 perfectly matched horses. A man in an expensive suit stepped down, followed by 2 other men carrying leather bags that probably held important papers. Uncle Robert had arrived and he'd brought lawyers. Catherine dressed quickly and ran to the main house. She found Marcus sitting up in bed, his broken leg propped up on pillows and his face still pale from his fever. But his green eyes were alert and angry as he watched the commotion outside his window. They're early, he said grimly. Robert said he'd be here next week. Maybe that's good. Get it over with quickly. Nothing about Robert Thorne is good, Catherine. The man's like a snake, smooth on the outside, poison on the inside. Through the window, they could see Mr. Thorne greeting his brother with a handshake that looked more like a business deal than a family reunion. Robert was shorter than his brother but dressed much fancier, with a gold watch chain and polished boots that had never seen real work. He doesn't look like a rancher, Catherine observed. That's because he's not. Robert spent his whole life in cities, living off the money our grandfather left him. Now that it's gone, He wants half of what my father built with his own hands. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mr. Thorne entered, looking tired and worried. Marcus, your uncle wants to meet with us in 1 hour. Are you up to it? I'm up to it. But Catherine stays. Son, this is family business. Catherine is family to me. If Robert's going to try to take our home, she has a right to know what's happening. Mr. Thorne looked surprised but nodded. All right, but let me do the talking. The meeting took place in the ranch office, a room Catherine had never seen before. It was lined with books and maps, and a huge desk dominated the center. Robert sat behind the desk like he already owned it, his lawyers flanking him like guards. Hello, Marcus, Robert said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I hear you've been playing cowboy for the past few years. How quaint. Hello, Uncle Robert. I hear you've been playing gentleman for the past few years. How expensive. Robert's smile tightened. Always had a smart mouth, didn't you? Well, that's about to change. Gentlemen, if you would explain the situation. One of the lawyers, a thin man with cold eyes, opened his briefcase. It's quite simple, really. Our grandfathers will stated that the ranch should be divided equally between his 2 sons upon his death. However, your father took control of the entire property and has been running it as his own for 30 years. Because I'm the one who worked the land, Mr. Thorne said quietly. Robert took his inheritance in cash and left for California. That's irrelevant, the lawyer continued. According to territorial law, Mr. Robert Thorne has a legitimate claim to 50% of all ranch assets, including land, cattle, and buildings. Catherine felt her heart sink. This sounded very official and legal, the kind of thing that poor people like her never won against. But Marcus leaned forward in his chair, despite his injured leg. Show me the will. I beg your pardon? The will. I want to see the exact wording of what our grandfather wrote. The lawyers exchanged glances. That's not necessary. We have copies of all relevant documents. Then you won't mind showing me the original. Actually, we would mind, Robert said, his voice getting harder. You're hardly qualified to interpret legal documents, nephew. You're just a ranch hand who happens to share our name. I'm a ranch hand who can read, Marcus shot back. And I know my rights. Catherine watched this exchange with growing admiration for Marcus. Even injured and outnumbered, he wasn't backing down. He was fighting for his family's land with the same courage he'd shown when facing that wild horse. Furthermore, the thin lawyer said, we've discovered some irregularities in how the ranch has been managed. Tax records show profits that were never reported to Mr. Robert Thorne as a rightful partner. Because he wasn't a partner, Mr. Thorne said firmly. He gave up any claim to partnership when he took his inheritance and left. The law says otherwise. Marcus struggled to his feet, ignoring Catherine's concerned look. The law says a lot of things, but this ranch was built by my father's sweat and blood. Every building, every fence, every head of cattle represents years of hard work that Robert never participated in. Sentiment is touching, Marcus, but it doesn't change legal facts, Robert said. I'm willing to be generous. I'll give you 30 days to arrange the sale of the property. We'll split the proceeds 50-50, and everyone can move on with their lives. And what about the cowboys who work here? What about their families? Robert shrugged. Not my problem. They can find work somewhere else. Catherine saw a red anger flash in Marcus's eyes. These men were talking about destroying the lives of dozens of good people like they were discussing the weather. There's another option, the thin lawyer said. Mr. Robert Thorne could become a full partner in ranch operations. He would move here and take an active role in management. Over my dead body, Marcus said flatly. That might not be necessary, Robert smiled coldly. You see, nephew, I've been doing some research on ranch management. The first thing any good manager does is cut unnecessary expenses. Like employing 30 cowboys when 15 would do the job. Like maintaining a full-time cook when the men could prepare their own meals. Catherine felt like she'd been slapped. Robert was threatening her job, her home, her whole life with Marcus. You can't do that, she said, speaking for the first time. Robert looked at her like he'd just noticed a bug in his soup. And you are? Catherine O'Brien. I'm the cook. Ah yes, the help. Well, Miss O'Brien, I can do whatever I want. This will be my ranch soon. Actually, it won't, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly man with a white beard and kind eyes. He carried a worn leather satchel and walked with the confidence of someone used to being listened to. Judge Morrison, Mr. Thorne said, standing up. What brings you here? Your telegram, Jay. I came as soon as I could. The judge looked around the room, his gaze settling on Robert and his lawyers. I understand there's some question about property rights. Your Honor, the thin lawyer said smoothly, this is a private family matter. Not anymore it isn't, Judge Morrison replied. You see, gentlemen, I was present when old Thomas Thorne wrote his will. I was his lawyer at the time before I became a judge, and I have a very clear memory of what that document actually says. Catherine felt hope bloom in her chest. Maybe they had a chance after all. I'd be very interested to see this will you're using as the basis for your claim, the judge continued, because the one I helped write says something quite different from what you've described. Robert's confident smile began to fade. I'm sure we can work out any discrepancies. I'm sure we can, Judge Morrison agreed. Shall we begin with you showing me your copy of the will? For the first time since arriving, Robert looked nervous, and Catherine began to think that maybe, just maybe, love and truth might be stronger than greed and lies. But she could see from the lawyers' faces that this fight was far from over. The fake will crumbled between Judge Morrison's fingers like old leaves, and Robert's face went white as fresh snow. Catherine watched from her chair as the thin lawyer tried to stuff papers back into his briefcase, his hands shaking like he had a fever. Gentlemen, Judge Morrison said calmly, forging legal documents is a serious crime in Montana territory. I suggest you leave this ranch immediately, before I decide to have you arrested. Robert jumped up so fast his chair fell backward. This isn't over, brother. I'll find another way to get what's mine. You already got what was yours 30 years ago, Mr. Thorne replied. You spent it all on gambling and fancy living. That's not my fault. The lawyers grabbed their bags and rushed toward the door like scared rabbits. But Robert turned back one more time, his eyes burning with hatred. Enjoy your little victory, Marcus. But remember, accidents happen on ranches. People get hurt. Sometimes they disappear altogether. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a bad fire. Marcus tried to stand up, but his broken leg wouldn't hold him. Are you threatening my family, Uncle? I'm just saying that life is unpredictable out here in the wilderness. Robert's smile was cold as winter wind. Anything could happen. After they left, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, Judge Morrison packed up his papers and shook hands with Mr. Thorne. Jay, keep an eye out for trouble. Men like Robert don't give up easy when there's money involved. That evening, Catherine was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard horses approaching fast. Through the window, she saw Pete and Jake riding hard toward the main house, their faces grim with bad news. She ran outside to meet them. What's wrong? Someone cut the fence on the south pasture, Pete said, sliding down from his horse. Let about 200 head of cattle loose. They're scattered all over creation. Could have been an accident, Jake added, but his voice said he didn't believe it. No accident cuts fence wire that clean, Pete replied. This was done on purpose. Marcus appeared on the porch of the main house, leaning on a wooden crutch. How many men do we need to round them up? Every man we got, and it'll still take 3 days, Pete said. Problem is, some of those cattle wandered onto government land. If we don't get them back quick, the territorial marshal might confiscate them for trespassing. Catherine felt anger burn in her chest. This had Robert's fingerprints all over it. He couldn't steal the ranch legally, so now he was trying to destroy it piece by piece. I'll help, she said. Marcus shook his head. Catherine, cattle drives are dangerous work. You could get hurt. I can ride as well as any man here. You need every hand you can get. She's right, Pete said. We're short-handed as it is, with you laid up and Billy still recovering from that pneumonia. The next morning, Catherine found herself on horseback for the first time in years, riding beside Tom and two other cowboys toward the scattered cattle. The horse beneath her was a gentle mare named Daisy, but Catherine's legs felt like jelly from being out of practice. They spent hours chasing stubborn cows through brush and rocks. Every time they got a small group together, one ornery bull would break away and lead half the herd in a different direction. Catherine's back ached. Her hands were raw from holding the reins, and sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cool weather. But she kept going. This was Marcus's ranch, his inheritance, his future. If helping save the cattle meant she could help save the man she loved, she'd chase cows until her horse dropped dead under her. Around noon, they stopped to rest and eat the sandwiches Catherine had packed that morning. Tom wiped his face with his bandana and looked around at the scattered cattle they'd managed to gather. "We got maybe 50 head here," he said. "Still missing a lot." "The rest probably headed toward Miller's Creek," Pete said. "That's where they always go when they get loose." But when they reached Miller's Creek, they found something that made Catherine's blood run cold. The creek was full of dead fish, floating belly up in water that looked wrong too cloudy, with an oily shine on the surface. "Someone poisoned the water," Tom said quietly. Pete's face went hard as stone. "If our cattle drink from this, they'll die. Every last one of them." They spent the rest of the day frantically driving cattle away from the poisoned creek, racing against time and thirst. By evening, they'd saved most of the herd, but everyone was exhausted and worried. "This ain't just about money anymore," Pete said as they rode back to the ranch. "Somebody's trying to destroy us completely." That night, Catherine was cleaning up after dinner when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw a stranger talking to Mr. Thorne near the barn. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his shirt. "That's Marshal Patterson," Jake said, appearing beside her. "Wonder what he wants." They soon found out. The marshal had come to arrest Marcus for cattle theft. "What?" Catherine gasped, running outside. "That's ridiculous." "I'm sorry, folks," Marshal Patterson said, tipping his hat. "But I got a complaint filed this morning. Says Marcus Thorne stole cattle from the government range and tried to hide them on private property." "Those are our cattle," Mr. Thorne protested. "Someone cut our fence and drove them onto government land on purpose." "That may be, but I got to follow the law. Marcus needs to come with me to town for questioning." Catherine watched in horror as Marcus gathered his coat and hat. His broken leg made it hard for him to walk, but he faced the marshal with dignity. "Marshal, this is obviously a setup," Marcus said calmly. "Someone's trying to frame me." "Could be. That's for the judge to decide. But right now, I got to take you in." As they loaded Marcus into the marshal's wagon, he caught Catherine's eye. "Take care of things while I'm gone," he said quietly. "And watch yourself. If someone's willing to frame me for theft, they might try something worse." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes as the wagon rolled away. First the cut fence, then the poisoned creek, now false charges against Marcus. Someone was playing a deadly game, and they were winning. But as she stood there watching the dust settle, Catherine made a decision. She might just be a cook from Chicago, but she wasn't going to let anyone destroy the people she loved without a fight. The next morning, she saddled up Daisy and rode to town alone, determined to find out who was behind these attacks and make them pay. What she discovered would change everything. The saloon in Cedar Falls was dark and smoky, filled with men who looked like they'd never done an honest day's work in their lives. Catherine stood outside the swinging doors, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Ladies didn't enter saloons, but she wasn't feeling much like a lady right now. She'd spent the morning asking questions around town, and every answer pointed to the same place. Someone was paying men to cause trouble at Cedar Creek Ranch, and the person doing the hiring was meeting his helpers at Murphy's saloon. Catherine pushed through the doors, and every conversation stopped. 24 pairs of eyes stared at her like she was a ghost. The bartender, a fat man with greasy hair, wiped his hands on a dirty towel. "Lady, you lost? I'm looking for information," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "About who's been hiring men to cause trouble for the Thorne Ranch." The saloon erupted in laughter. "You hear that, boys?" one man called out. "The little lady wants to play detective." But not everyone was laughing. In the back corner, Catherine spotted a familiar face, one of Robert's lawyers, the thin man with cold eyes. He was sitting with 3 rough-looking men, and they were all staring at her with expressions that made her skin crawl. "Miss O'Brien," the lawyer said, standing up slowly. "What a surprise to see you here." "I bet it is," Catherine replied. "Especially since you're supposed to be halfway back to San Francisco by now." The lawyer smiled, but it was the kind of smile a snake might make before striking. "My client decided to extend our stay. We're exploring other business opportunities in the area." "You mean you're paying criminals to destroy the Thorn Ranch? That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" Catherine's heart pounded, but she kept her chin up. "I have enough proof to get Marshall Patterson very interested in your activities." "I doubt that. You see, Miss O'Brien, the Marshal is currently busy with other matters, like questioning your boyfriend about cattle theft." One of the rough men at the table leaned forward. "Boss, want me to handle this?" Catherine felt fear creep up her spine, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Handle what? An innocent woman asking questions? That would look very suspicious, wouldn't it?" The lawyer studied her for a long moment. "You know, Miss O'Brien, you're causing a lot of trouble for a simple cook. Perhaps it's time you found employment elsewhere. Perhaps it's time you stopped committing crimes." "Crimes?" The lawyer laughed. "I haven't committed any crimes. I've simply been consulting with local businessmen about opportunities in the cattle trade." "By poisoning creeks and cutting fences?" The smile faded from the lawyer's face. "You're walking on dangerous ground, Miss O'Brien. This territory can be very unforgiving to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." Catherine realized she was in serious trouble. These men weren't going to let her walk out of here with what she'd learned. She glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of making it outside before they could stop her. "Gentlemen," she said loudly, making sure everyone in the saloon could hear, "I want all these witnesses to know that if anything happens to me, you'll be the first people Marshall Patterson investigates." It was a smart move. The other men in the saloon were criminals themselves, but they didn't want to be connected to violence against a woman. That would bring too much attention from the law. The lawyer's jaw tightened. "You're very clever, Miss O'Brien, but cleverness can only protect you for so long." Catherine backed toward the door, never taking her eyes off the men at the table. "Tell your boss that the Thorns aren't as helpless as he thinks. And tell him that some of us know how to fight dirty too." She made it outside without anyone following her, but her hands were shaking as she untied Daisy from the hitching post. She'd learned what she needed to know, but she'd also made some very dangerous enemies. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Every shadow might hide one of Robert's hired men. Every sound might be hoofbeats following her. By the time she reached Cedar Creek, Catherine was jumping at every noise. She found Mr. Thorne in the barn, checking on the horses. When she told him what she'd discovered, his face went pale. "Catherine, you could have been killed. Those men don't care about anything except money. But now we know for sure that Robert's behind everything. We can tell Marshall Patterson." Mr. Thorne shook his head sadly. "It won't matter. Robert's too smart to leave evidence connecting him to the crimes. He's paying other people to do his dirty work, and they won't talk. So he just gets away with it? For now. But men like Robert always make mistakes eventually. We just have to be patient and careful." That evening, Catherine was preparing dinner when Billy burst into the cookhouse, his face white with panic. "Miss Catherine, come quick. There's a fire." She ran outside and saw orange flames dancing against the night sky. The fire was coming from the direction of the south pasture, where they'd just repaired the fence that had been cut. "It's the hay barn," Pete yelled, running past with a bucket in each hand. "Someone set fire to our winter feed." Catherine grabbed buckets and joined the bucket brigade, passing water from the well to the men fighting the flames. But even as they worked, she could see it was hopeless. The fire was too big, spreading too fast. By morning, the hay barn was nothing but smoking ruins. Without winter feed for the cattle, the ranch would face serious problems when the cold weather returned. "This is getting out of hand," Mr. Thorne said, staring at the blackened remains. "Robert's not just trying to steal the ranch anymore. He's trying to destroy it completely." Pete spat into the ashes. "Why don't we just ride into town and settle this the old-fashioned way? Because that's exactly what he wants us to do. The minute we start a fight, he can claim we're the criminals." Catherine felt exhaustion weighing on her like a heavy blanket. They were fighting an enemy who hid in shadows, using money and lawyers and hired thugs to do his dirty work. How could honest people win against someone like that? But as she looked around at the faces of the cowboys, tired, worried, but still determined, Catherine realized something important. Robert might have money and lawyers, but they had something more valuable. They had each other. "Mr. Thorne," she said quietly, "what if we stop playing defense and start playing offense?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we set a trap for Uncle Robert? Make him think he's won, then catch him in the act of doing something we can prove." Mr. Thorne looked at her with new respect. "That's a dangerous game, Catherine. If it goes wrong, we could lose everything. We're going to lose everything anyway if we don't do something. At least this way we have a chance." As the sun rose over the smoking ruins of their hay barn, Catherine began forming a plan that would either save Cedar Creek Ranch or destroy it completely. But first, they had to get Marcus out of jail. The jail cell door slammed shut with a sound like thunder, and Marcus felt his world shrink to iron bars and stone walls. 3 days had passed since Marshal Patterson arrested him, and every hour felt like a year. Through the small window, he could see smoke rising from the direction of Cedar Creek Ranch, and his heart ached knowing he couldn't protect his family. "Visitor for you, Thorne," the deputy called out, jingling his keys. Marcus expected to see his father or maybe Catherine, but instead, a stranger walked into the cell area. The man was tall and lean, with sharp eyes and clothes that screamed city lawyer. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a smile that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Hello, Marcus. I'm James Crawford, representing your Uncle Robert. I think we need to talk. I don't have anything to say to you." Crawford sat down on the wooden stool outside the cell, making himself comfortable. "Oh, I think you do. You see, your situation is quite serious. Cattle theft is a hanging offense in Montana territory." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Those were our cattle. Someone drove them onto government land to frame me. Can you prove that? Because I have 3 witnesses who say they saw you cutting government fence and driving stolen cattle onto your ranch. Those witnesses are lying. Perhaps, but they're very convincing liars. The kind that juries believe." Crawford opened his briefcase and pulled out some papers. "However, my client is prepared to be generous. Drop all claims to the ranch, and the charges against you disappear." "Never. Think carefully, Marcus. Your father is an old man. Your girlfriend is just a cook with no money or influence. How long do you think they can fight this battle without you?" Through the window, Marcus could see more smoke rising. His jaw clenched as he realized what Crawford was really saying. "You're threatening them. I'm simply pointing out reality. Accidents happen on ranches, especially when the owner isn't there to protect his property." Marcus gripped the iron bars so hard his knuckles went white. "If you hurt Catherine or my father, I'll kill you myself." Crawford laughed. "Such violent talk from a man in jail. That won't help your case at all." After the lawyer left, Marcus paced his cell like a caged wolf. Every instinct screamed at him to break down the door and race home to protect the people he loved. But these iron bars were stronger than his desperation. That evening, Deputy Miller brought Marcus his dinner beans and hard bread that tasted like sawdust. Miller was a good man, honest and fair, and Marcus had known him for years. "Deputy, I need to ask you something," Marcus said quietly. "Those witnesses against me, do you know anything about them?" Miller glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I ain't supposed to talk about ongoing cases, Marcus. Please, my family's in danger." The deputy sat down heavily on the stool. "All right, but you didn't hear this from me. Those 3 men who claim they saw you steal cattle? They all have criminal records. Theft, fraud, Assault. Not exactly reliable witnesses. Then why is Marshall Patterson believing them? Because they all tell the same story, word for word. Like they rehearsed it. But here's the strange part. All three of them suddenly came into money last week. New clothes, new boots, paying off debts they've owed for months. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Someone paid them to lie. That's what I think. But proving it is another matter. What if I could get one of them to tell the truth? Miller shook his head. Even if you could, you're stuck in here. And Marshall Patterson won't listen to accusations without solid proof. That night, Marcus lay on his hard cot staring at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Catherine and his father were fighting for their lives while he sat helpless in a jail cell. The frustration was eating him alive. But as dawn broke through his small window, Marcus began to form a plan. It was risky and probably illegal, but it might be their only chance. The next morning, Billy unexpectedly appeared at the jail. The young cowboy looked nervous and kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected trouble. "Billy? What are you doing here?" "Miss Catherine sent me with a message," Billy whispered. "She says to tell you that the wildcats are hunting tonight, and the moon will be dark." Marcus felt his heart race. Catherine was using a code they'd worked out years ago when they were children playing games. She was planning something dangerous, and she needed him to be ready. "Tell her I understand," Marcus said. "And Billy? Tell her to be careful. There are more wolves out there than she knows." That afternoon, Marcus pretended to be sick. He groaned and clutched his stomach, making such a fuss that Deputy Miller finally called for the town doctor. Dr. Henderson was an old friend of the Thorne family, and when he examined Marcus, his eyes showed understanding. "Deputy, this man needs medicine from my office. I'll have to go fetch it. Can't you just tell me what to get?" "It's a special mixture. I need to prepare it myself. Watch him carefully. This condition can be dangerous if it gets worse." An hour later, Dr. Henderson returned with a bottle of medicine and some very interesting news. "Deputy Miller, I just came from the telegraph office. There's a message for Marshall Patterson from the territorial governor. Seems like someone's been asking questions about those witnesses." Miller read the telegram and his face went pale. "This says the governor's office has evidence that Robert Thorne hired men to commit perjury." Marcus felt hope bloom in his chest. Catherine hadn't just been sitting around waiting for rescue. She'd been fighting back with her intelligence and determination. "I guess that changes things," Dr. Henderson said casually. "Hard to hold a man on charges from witnesses who've been proved liars." Deputy Miller looked uncomfortable. "I need to talk to Marshall Patterson. This is above my authority." But Marshall Patterson was mysteriously unavailable. According to his secretary, he'd ridden out that morning on urgent business and wouldn't return until tomorrow. "Convenient," Dr. Henderson muttered, almost like someone warned him to make himself scarce. As evening approached, Marcus could hear unusual activity in the street outside. Horses galloping past, men shouting urgent messages, the general sound of trouble brewing. His plan was working, but he wouldn't know if it succeeded until it was over. Near midnight, the jail door opened and Catherine slipped inside like a shadow. She was dressed in dark clothes and carried a set of keys that definitely didn't belong to her. "How did you get those?" Marcus whispered. "Deputy Miller is visiting his sick aunt tonight," Catherine said with a small smile. "Amazing how many people get sick when there's justice to be done." Marcus realized that half the town was probably helping with this jailbreak. Robert had made enemies of honest folks, and they were fighting back. "Catherine, this is dangerous. If they catch you, dash." "They won't catch me, but we need to hurry. Your uncle's men are planning something terrible tonight, and your father needs help." Marcus's cell door swung open, and he stepped into freedom. "What kind of terrible?" "They're going to burn down the main house, with your father inside." Marcus felt rage burn through his veins like fire. Robert wasn't just trying to steal the ranch anymore. He was trying to commit murder. "Then let's go stop them." As they slipped out of the jail into the dark night, Marcus realized that this fight was no longer about property or inheritance. It was about survival, and the winner would take everything. The final battle for Cedar Creek Ranch was about to begin. The orange glow on the horizon told Marcus everything he needed to know. They were already too late. Robert's men had started the fire while he and Catherine were still 3 miles from the ranch house. Marcus kicked his horse harder, racing through the darkness with Catherine close behind. There! Catherine pointed ahead as they crested the hill. Someone's on the porch. Through the smoke and flames, Marcus could see his father fighting to get out of the main house. But the front door was blocked by burning timber, and the windows were too high for an old man to climb through safely. "Father!" Marcus shouted, jumping down from his horse before it even stopped moving. Jake and Pete were already there with buckets, but the fire was spreading too fast. The whole front of the house was engulfed in flames, and the heat was so intense they couldn't get close enough to help. "We tried to get him out," Pete gasped, his face black with smoke. "But someone barred the doors from outside. He's trapped in there." Marcus looked around desperately. The fire had started in multiple places at once. This wasn't an accident or even a simple arson. Someone had planned this carefully to make sure his father couldn't escape. "The back window," Catherine said suddenly. "The one in his study. It's lower than the others." They ran around to the back of the house, where the fire hadn't spread yet. Marcus could see his father's shadow moving behind the study window, and he felt relief flood through him. At least his father was still alive. "Father! Over here!" Marcus called out. The window opened, and Jay Thorne's smoke-stained face appeared. "Marcus? How did you get out of jail?" "Long story. Can you climb down? My legs hurt. I think something fell on it when I was trying to get out the front door." Marcus looked at the window. It was about 8 feet off the ground, not impossible, but dangerous for an injured man. "Can you hang and drop?" "I'll have to try." Catherine grabbed Marcus's arm. "Wait, look." Across the yard, shadowy figures were moving through the trees. At least 6 men, all carrying rifles, and they were surrounding the house. Robert's hired guns had come to make sure no one escaped the fire alive. "We're trapped," Pete said grimly. Marcus felt his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with his father still trapped in a burning building. But giving up wasn't an option. "Pete, take Jake and circle around to the barn. Make noise, draw their attention. Catherine, help me get father down." "What about the gunmen?" "I'll handle them." Marcus had grown up on this ranch. He knew every tree, every rock, every shadow. These hired killers might have guns, but they didn't know the land like he did. He slipped into the darkness, moving silently toward the nearest gunman. The man was focused on the burning house, not expecting an attack from behind. Marcus hit him with a tree branch, and the man dropped like a sack of grain. 1 down, 5 to go. The sound of his father dropping from the window told Marcus that Catherine had gotten him to safety. Now he could focus on the immediate threat. A gunshot rang out from the direction of the barn, followed by shouting. Pete and Jake were doing their job, creating confusion and drawing fire away from the house. Marcus circled around to where 2 more gunmen were positioned. They were arguing about whether to investigate the noise or stay at their posts. Their argument ended when Marcus knocked them both unconscious with a fence post. "Where is everyone?" one of the remaining gunmen called out. "Thompson? Wilson?" Marcus smiled grimly. The hunters were becoming the hunted, but his satisfaction was short-lived. From the shadows near the barn came a voice that made his blood freeze. "Enough games, nephew." Robert stepped into the firelight, holding a rifle pointed at Pete's head. Behind him stood his thin lawyer and 2 more gunmen, all armed and ready to shoot. "Drop your weapons and come out where I can see you," Robert called, "or your friends start dying." Marcus felt his heart sink. He'd taken out half of Robert's men, but his uncle still held all the cards. And now innocent people were going to die because of a family feud. "I'm coming out," Marcus called back, stepping into the light with his hands raised. "Smart boy. Now call your girlfriend and your father out too." Catherine and Jay Thorne emerged from behind the house, supporting each other. Marcus's father was limping badly, but alive. That was something, at least. Excellent, Robert said with a cold smile. Now we can finish this properly. Robert, why? Jay? Thorne asked, his voice heavy with sadness. We're family. How did it come to this? It came to this because you stole my inheritance 30 years ago, Robert snarled. You let me think I was getting a fair share when you took the ranch for yourself. You took your share in cash and spent it all. That wasn't my fault. It was your fault for not stopping me. You should have made me stay, made me work the land like you did. Instead, you let me leave and make mistakes. Marcus realized with shock that Robert actually believed his own twisted logic. In his mind, he was the victim, and everything he'd done was justified revenge. So now you're going to kill us all? Marcus asked. I'm going to clean up loose ends. The fire will be blamed on an accident. Very sad, the whole Thorne family died trying to escape. There won't be anyone left to contest my claim to the ranch. Except us, said a new voice from the darkness. Marshal Patterson stepped into the light, followed by 6 armed deputies. His badge gleamed in the firelight, and his rifle was pointed directly at Robert. Robert Thorne, you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, conspiracy, and about a dozen other crimes. Robert's face went white. Marshal, you don't understand. These people dash. I understand perfectly. Dr. Henderson brought me some very interesting evidence tonight. Seems those witnesses against Marcus were paid to lie. We found the money in their rooms, along with letters proving you hired them. The thin lawyer tried to run, but 2 deputies grabbed him before he took 3 steps. Robert's other gunmen threw down their weapons and raised their hands, smart enough to know when they were beaten. But how did you know to come here? Robert demanded. Marshal Patterson looked at Catherine with something like admiration. Miss O'Brien sent word that there might be trouble out here tonight. Smart woman, figuring out your whole plan. Catherine smiled for the first time in days. I told you we should start playing offense instead of defense. As the deputies loaded Robert and his men into wagons, Marcus put his arm around Catherine and looked at the smoking ruins of part of his family home. They'd won, but the cost had been high. We can rebuild, his father said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Together, Catherine added, taking Marcus's hand. Marcus squeezed her fingers gently. Together. The nightmare was over, but their real life together was just beginning.